welcome to our webinar town hall this evening. We're joined by the Kelley Block, a member from Saskatchewan. Carleton Eagle Creek is the riding name. That is just outside of Regina and towards the Alberta border. Or not? No, Saskatoon and towards the Alberta border.
That's right.
Yeah, and one of the big cities, and then towards Alberta. So she's headed in the right direction. I like to remind everybody that Peace River Westlock is the promised land, and we've got 7,500 dairy animals, the honey capital of Canada. So we're literally flowing with milk and honey, and we've got the municipal districts of peace and opportunity, and it's all been settled on a promise called Treaty 8. So it's truly the promised land. I'm sure that every MP thinks their riding's the best, but I'm convinced that mine is. And so, Kelley, you're gonna have to like come up with a little bit of smack talk, maybe. But I'm always open to it, but I haven't found another one yet.
Well, have you been to Carleton Trail Eagle Creek?
I'm sure I've driven through it, but
Maybe you have.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I've driven to Ottawa. And back now 3 times. And one time I went through Regina and then came north. So I'm sure I came through.
Okay.
I know for a fact that I did because I seen a big sign with your face on it.
There we go. Yes, I have signs everywhere.
Yeah. So it was like represented by MP Kelley Block. So yeah, no, I remember that for sure. And then I remember during the election, then I seen on Facebook that your signs were upside down because your MP signs had to be reversed during the election.
Well, yeah, we would have probably tried to cover up as many of them as possible because many years ago, a former colleague shared a very good idea with me that was to try and get my signs up in sign corridors of smaller communities. So that's what we did. We have signs in many of the sign corridors, and it certainly makes for it makes for a huge presence in the riding when you've done that.
So Kelley has been elected since 2008.
That's right.
So she's like brings the experience to Parliament Hill. I bug her about that a little bit. I'm not always sure if she appreciates that or not, but I do always rely on her for like, what did they do back then, or has this been tried before? And Kelley.
Yeah, I remember you asking me, maybe it was last fall, if I was retiring. And I thought, why should I be?
No, you shouldn't be. I got our other colleague, David Anderson, from the very southern corner of Saskatchewan. I probably asked you because I was worried you were. I remember when he announced that he was retiring, I was very upset with him. Yeah,
an amazing individual and an amazing member of Parliament, true mentor to me in many of the places that I've decided to pour my time and energy here.
Yeah. So you were talking about your son, and I'm pretty sure that I actually seem to get more of your husband's Facebook stuff in my Facebook feed than yours. But I'm pretty sure there's some grandbabies kicking around.
Absolutely. So my husband is far more active than I am on Facebook. He loves to boast about our children and our grandchildren, as do I, but he does more of it. So I have 4 children, 3 daughters and a son, all married and all with families. So I have 11 grandchildren.
11. Okay.
7 granddaughters, 4 grandsons.
Okay, well, that's quite the blessing there.
Yes, so it absolutely is.
And one of the things I often flag with when I'm introducing other MPs to Peace River Westlock is the McLeans Awards.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so Shannon was the most representative of her riding, and Garnet's been the hardest working. And you got one of those awards too one time.
I did back in 2010. I was nominated to be the Rising Star Parliamentarian of the Year Rising Star Award.
Okay, and what roles were you carrying back then?
What roles was I carrying back then? You know, I had been elected for about a year and a half. At that time, I was a backbencher. I was serving on a couple of committees. You know, if I look back over my career as a member of parliament, I've served on many of our standing committees. And back then I would have been on procedure and house affairs and ethics, and maybe even had graduated to the finance committee by then.
Okay, so you've had a hand at all the committees. See, I was telling everybody that Kelley brings experience, so that's for sure. Currently, you're a committee chair.
I am chairing the Public Accounts Committee, which is an incredibly important committee, I think, when it comes to scrutinizing past spending and, you know, scrutinizing the Auditor General's reports and monitoring the financial health of the nation, certainly the government of Canada. And I thoroughly enjoy being a chair. It's my first time in, you know, the 13 years that I've been a member of parliament, and the many committees I've sat on that I have served as a chair. So a bit of learning for me, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
Very good. Very good. You're doing a study on water under reserve.
Well, so what we typically do is we follow up and do reports on all of the reports that the Auditor General has tabled. Okay. So in her lockups, she'll table a number of reports. And if we have time, we will follow up on all of those. So yes, safe drinking water in First Nations communities is one, you know, the Canada Child Benefit is another, the shipbuilding strategy. So anything that she chooses to audit is what we follow up on.
Okay. Interesting. It's not a committee that I've followed very closely, so that's interesting. There's a thing called IP4.
Yes.
This is in every industry, there's always the acronyms. I come from the automotive world, and the PCM and TCM and CAN bus and all this kind of stuff. These are words that mean nothing to everybody else, but
sure.
Are the jargon of the industry. And in our world here in Parliament, we've got all these PROC and INAN and all these terms, and IPP4 is one of these.
Yes.
Can you tell us what IPP4 is and how you're connected to it?
I can. You know, I could probably spend the rest of the time we have together talking about IPP4. I won't, but my involvement with IPP4 certainly is I would say foundational to what I do here in Ottawa on the Hill when I'm not serving in the House doing my constituency work or my committee work. And it probably, I would say, is foundational to why I introduced the private members bill that I did. So many years ago, back in 2012, you mentioned David Anderson. He was very instrumental in raising the issue of freedom of religion or belief here on the Hill, here in Ottawa, as a member of Parliament. And I began to attend a number of the conferences that he would sponsor, and really got drawn into paying attention to that issue, caring deeply about it. Obviously, we all care about our freedoms, but certainly following along with David in what he was championing was what really got me connected with IPP4. David Anderson was a founding member of IPP4. He was on the I think he was on the steering committee, still is serving on the steering committee for IPP4. So a number of countries got together, a small group of countries, members of parliament, parliamentarians from a handful of countries got together and said, listen, this is a huge issue. It's something that we need to be monitoring and drawing attention to worldwide. It was around the same time that we were looking at creating an office of religious freedom in the Foreign Affairs Ministry. And so when we appointed Andrew Bennett, Father Deacon Andrew Bennett, to be the ambassador for that office, it was upon his encouragement that rather than create a freedom of religion or belief caucus, that we should actually turn our sights more internationally. And so David really got involved in doing that. So IPP4 is the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief. And they truly, have grown exponentially over the last, I want to say 9 years, maybe it's only 7, 8, 9 years that they've been in existence. And they really do a good job of monitoring issues of freedom of religion or belief around the world and drawing that to the attention of parliaments and governments around the world, parliamentarians for sure. And they had a strong desire to create chapters within the nations that were members of IPP4, and Canada was one. And so I basically responded to David's call to look at creating something like that here in Canada. And so we created CAN4 back in 2017, which is the Canadian chapter for freedom of religion or belief.
Okay. And you're
I am co-chairing it with another fellow parliamentarian who is a member of the Liberal Party, John McKay.
Okay. Folks might recognize him. He's also one of the co-chairs of the all-party group to end human trafficking and modern-day slavery with myself. So, multifaceted member of parliament from the Liberals there.
Yes.
There's an organization called Open Doors Canada, and they release a yearly World Watch List. Typically, they come by Parliament Hill and do a presentation on that. I can't say as I recall it during COVID. Maybe I missed it, but I know that every other year when it was on the Hill, I would attend that. It was always interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Is that connected with IPP4?
So I don't know what their connection is with IPP4.
Okay.
But certainly they have partnered with CAN4 to host their events on the Hill.
Yeah.
And so they did happen last spring and this spring in March, but they were virtual due to the pandemic. And back in 2019, we did host their event on the Hill here. And so that's one of the other mandates of CAN4 is to build relationships with organizations here in Canada that are engaged on the issue of freedom of religion or belief, or champion that issue. And so Open Doors is one of those.
Now, you've introduced Bill C-268, and at the risk of folks probably joined us to hear about conscious rights and these sorts of things. What's the connection between maybe IPP4 or CAN4 and conscious rights? Well,
I mean, the charter of IPP4 is based on the UN Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18, which definitely speaks to freedom of religion or belief. And we certainly adopted that as part of our charter for CAN4. And so if you look at Canada's charter, Section 2 of our charter, under the heading of fundamental freedoms, states that everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communications, freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of association. And so you can see that common thread through, from the UN Declaration of Human Rights to an organization like IPP4. Different nations perhaps have similar rights enshrined in their constitutions, and we certainly do in ours. And that would be the connection of the Freedom of Conscience Protection Act for me.
So, Bill, I'm getting some bad feedback here. Bill C-268 is the Freedom of Conscience Protection Act.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what is this bill and why is it important?
Sure. So this bill is pretty straightforward. It amends the Criminal Code, section 241.1, to make it an offense to intimidate medical practitioners, pharmacists, or other healthcare providers for the purpose of compelling them to participate directly or indirectly in MAID. And I recognize my light has just gone off because I'm not moving around enough in my room. I'll try and stand up and see if that makes a difference for you here.
Oh.
We have these lights that automatically turn off and mine aren't coming on.
It's looking fine from my end.
Okay, good. It's gotten a little dark in here, but that's okay. So the first part of the bill is to ensure that it's an offense to intimidate medical professionals for the purpose of compelling them to participate directly or indirectly in MAID. And secondly, it would make it an offense to refuse to employ or dismiss someone from employment for the sole reason that they refuse to participate in MAID. So I guess if passed, this bill would ensure that medical professionals who choose not to take part in or refer a patient for euthanasia or medical assistance in dying will never be forced by violence, threats, coercion, or loss of employment to violate their freedoms protected in Section 2 of the Charter that we just spoke about.
So what's this? Why is this bill important?
Well, now more than ever, I believe there is a need for a protection of conscience rights in the medical profession. This bill does address the very real challenge that doctors and other medical professionals are facing right now regarding their conscience rights as defined in the Charter. And this is as a result of the legalization of medical assistance in dying, or MAID, in 2015, and the recent expansions to it through Bill C-7. Doctors are now being forced to offer death as a treatment option, regardless of a patient's medical history. And in my discussions with stakeholders, I have heard that without conscience rights, some medical professionals may choose to leave their field or even the profession altogether.
Are you the first person to introduce this bill? Is this your idea, or what's the history of this bill been?
I'm glad you asked that. I did in my first hour of debate acknowledge that this bill was built on the very hard work and determination of other members of Parliament who have gone before me. The first iteration of this bill, of a bill addressing this issue, was introduced by the late Mark Warwa in 2016, but it did not progress because the government introduced Bill C-14. And after C-14 was passed into law, my former colleague, whom we've already talked about, David Anderson, introduced his private member's bill, Bill C-418, which died on the order paper when the election was called in 2019. I should also mention that my bill, Bill C-268, is the exact same number as Mark bill was
Really?
on this issue. So I feel tremendously privileged and honored that it is the same number. It's a great coincidence.
So conscious rights is a little bit of like an abstract idea. I wonder if you can give us just like maybe a little more concrete terms. What are conscious rights? And
Yeah.
It's the way out.
Well, I think when you start to talk about conscience and try to define conscience, I did the same thing. I went to the dictionary, and there are a number of definitions, for conscience. And I think when we talk about conscience rights, it's important to understand what conscience is defined as. And most definitions would boil it down to an individual's inner sense of knowing the difference between what is right and what is wrong, and that guides their behavior. So the Latin word, and I looked this up as well. I did a fair bit of reading, obviously, but the Latin word for conscience, conscientia, refers to the application of our moral knowledge in certain situations. So that's conscience. And I guess if you think about rights, that's pretty self-explanatory. And so, as I mentioned before, conscience rights is the first freedom listed in Section 2 of our charter.
Freedom of conscience, yeah.
Yeah.
So when the rubber hits the road, particularly around medical aid in dying or euthanasia, we see that some doctors are morally opposed to the whole concept of assisted suicide, euthanasia, medical aid in dying, and don't want to be part of it. So that's kind of where the conscious protections would come in, saying that you can't force somebody to participate.
That's right.
We've heard from a number of actors, particularly the justice minister, saying that the conscience protections are in the charter, therefore it's not needed in a particular bill. What do you have to say to that criticism?
Well, the minister knows full well that the government's medical assistance in dying bill, or now this legislation, does nothing to protect conscience rights. What it does is allude to conscience rights, but with no legal weight behind it. It does leave both patients and medical professionals vulnerable to abuse and coercion. We heard testimony during the review of Bill C7 from experts that there was a desperate need for national conscience rights protection. And I don't think we would have heard that from those individuals if it truly was entrenched in legislation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was, I remember at the C7 discussions, there was a Dr. Heidi Jans who spoke fairly profoundly about the fact that if she was going to be forced to participate, there would be, she would just exit. She was near retirement anyways, and she would just exit the field basically.
Yeah.
Which would just lead to the more shortage of doctors that we already see, particularly in northern rural Canada. Absolutely,
and I know, Arnold, that you've had an opportunity to introduce a number of private members' bills, and so you know that there's a lot of work that goes into getting prepared, and while you can't consult on the text of a bill, you certainly can consult on the issue itself.
Yeah.
And I heard from a number of physicians on this issue. Heidi Jans was someone that I met with. She shared her story. And I also met with a number of other physicians who have been championing this issue for years. In fact, I've begun to receive emails from from physicians like from across the country telling me how important it is. And I'll just, without sharing with you anything about, the individual that I received this from, here's just an example of what I'm hearing from physicians. I've been concerned about the protection of conscience in my practice and in our society for some time now. Physicians must be protected in their dedication to the principles of first do no harm when dealing with patient care. To do this not only requires medical principles, but sound ethics and character. Physicians following their conscience is essential to the health of a robust and caring medical profession. Without this, we fall prey to the dangers of others, including the government, dictating what they think is in the best interest of our patients. This severely erodes the sacred patient-physician relationship. And that's a direct quote from an email I received.
So maybe getting just a little more technical, the bill, you've tabled the bill, so first reading is done, it has a number. Where are we at in the process going from here? Have you had for your first hour debate, or is it at committee? Where are we at?
So my bill is, we had the first hour of debate at second reading. And so the next hour of debate is scheduled for the very end of this session on June 23rd. And it is a, I don't know whether to be pleased that we're getting that second hour of debate in, or whether I wish that we would, it would get pushed off until the fall. But I mean, what this means is that we'll do the debate and then it won't get voted on until the fall.
Okay.
So it would get pushed to the fall session because we will rise. We're set to rise at the end of the day on the 23rd.
Okay, that's kind of a weird spot to be in.
It is, right?
Yeah.
I don't know whether, like I said, whether, I'm glad that we're going to get both hours of debate in, or whether I'd like us to pick up with an hour of debate in the fall.
Yeah, because it'll be voting on something that we've all forgotten what the debate was about. It's half a year.
I'm not going to let that happen.
Okay. Good.
What this will actually do, I think, is give us the summer, hopefully the summer, to raise awareness regarding the issue that our medical professionals are facing, as well as on the bill itself.
One of the MLAs that I overlap with, Dan Williams. So I overlap with five MLAs, and he brought forward private members' bills in the Alberta legislature on conscious rights protection. So I should definitely connect the two of you on that. For sure.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I would be happy to have a conversation with him.
Well, so what can folks do to help support this bill?
Arnold, I'm very glad you've asked me that. As I said, the time that we have between now and a vote definitely gives us some time to continue raising awareness. It gives Canadians the rest of the summer to make their views known to their members of parliament by either emailing, calling, or writing them and asking them to support the bill. There's also a petition that they can sign. You just need to visit savesecondopinions.ca. And finally, talk about this issue and the bill with your family and friends and encourage them to do the same. It obviously wouldn't hurt, I think, to write the Prime Minister as well as the Minister of Justice to allow this bill to pass.
What's that website again that we can go to?
savesecondopinions.ca.
Is there anything else you want to bring up around the conscience rights issue more broadly, or about your bill in particular?
Just as I mentioned the website, there's a reason why we chose that to be the website. And it's an important message that we heard from our medical professionals on the issue of euthanasia or medical assistance in dying. And it was alluded to in the email that I quoted from. Conscience rights are critical to how our healthcare system works. When you receive a diagnosis as a patient, you do expect to have the choice to seek out other expert advice. You want to trust, you want to be able to trust that your doctor is going to recommend and provide the care that they believe is best for you. But if every doctor and medical professional is forced by law to give you the exact same list of options, you no longer have the choice to get a second opinion. And our entire healthcare system is weakened as a result. And that was a point that was brought home to me time and time again by many physicians that I spoke to. And one of the physicians, basically stated, and I did quote it in my speech in the House, Dr. Ellen Warner, she stated, in the absence of conscience protection, the group with the most to lose are the patients, the ones we are trying to help.
Yep. Well, I think with that we'll just move into questions. And so we've got a number of people on here. Dale, if you want to move them into the open forum here, take some questions. So if anyone has a question, if you want to raise your hand and I can recognize you, there's a raise hand function down at the bottom of your screen. And I've seen that Albert's got his mic unmuted already. Albert, did you have a question or comment? All right. Barry, Monica, or Colleen? Well, looks like you answered all the questions on conscience rights tonight, Kelley.
Well, that means you asked the right questions, Arnold.
There you go. So yeah, so Kelley and I are both in Ottawa this week. It's one of the final weeks for Parliament sitting. We've got the Budget Implementation Act. It sounds like that's going to be kind of up for the next few days here. So we'll be debating that. And we had recently a motion on the state of the 215 children graves in Canada. Yeah. So we've got a motion on that that's been voted on. We had C6 was up for a bit of debate today. So those are some of the things that we've been working on. Kelley, if you want to address any of those topics. And
yeah, in really broad strokes, I guess I would say that there have been a lot of very important issues that we've been dealing with over the last number of weeks. The agenda feels a little disjointed because we're going from one piece of legislation to another and then back. And I don't know if that's by default or design, probably a little bit of both, given how this government has not managed the legislative agenda very well. But I would just say that, I have been engaged in while I'm more than often participating from home over Zoom, have been following a lot of these debates with interest, obviously, certainly the debate on C10 and what has happened just in the last couple of days with the government shutting down debate in committee on a bill that we know has been widely condemned for its attacks on freedom of speech. I think that sets a very dangerous precedent, and I think it was our shadow ministers who noted that this is an extreme tactic that has only been used 3 times in our history. And so that's something that I think Canadians need to be paying attention to. And I know they are. I'm hearing from many. I'm receiving a lot of correspondence about Bill C-10. You know, where they believe this bill is going to take us in limiting our freedom of speech. You mentioned Bill C-6. I know that that's something that was debated again today. And I guess on that bill, I have not participated in that debate, but certainly have been following it very closely and know, you know, the very good work that was done by our members on that committee, who, you know, for months throughout the legislative process, urged the government to fix the definition of conversion therapy so that parliamentarians could work together to target coercive and degrading actions that violate the dignity of a person while still respecting fundamental freedoms. And so I've been very disappointed that they did not allow the 2 very reasonable amendments that we put forward to add that clarity and to ensure those freedoms. They were blocked by the Liberals and the NDP. And so extremely disappointed. And but I guess I should know better by now that that is more than likely going to be the case. And I know, again, I'm hearing from many, many constituents on this bill as well, and their deep concerns in regards to its undermining our fundamental freedoms.
Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We've had on for the last 40 minutes, Member of Parliament Kelley Block from Carleton Eagle Creek, which is in Saskatchewan, right next door to Alberta. She has recently introduced Bill C-268, the Freedom of Conscious Protection Act. If you Google any of those things, I'm sure you'll end up at her government-issued website, and you'll be able to read more about that. She also has a website about something about a second opinion. Okay, what's the website there?
SaveSecondOpinions.ca.
SaveSecondOpinion.ca, which is dedicated to just her private members bill. So please go and check that out. I want to thank once again everyone taking some time out of their evening to join us here on Zoom and on Facebook. And I want to thank especially Kelley for coming to visit us just virtually in Peace River Westlock, or as I like to call it, the Promised Land. Kelley, it's been a pleasure to serve with you for these last number of years, and I look forward to continuing to do so as we go forward. And well, who knows what happens in the next election here, when or if that's happening here in the fall. But nonetheless, we'll hope that your bill gets voted on.
Thank you, Arnold, and thank you for the invitation to join you and for the opportunity to speak to what I believe is a very important piece of legislation that needs to get passed. And I too have appreciated all of the issues that you've championed in the time that you've been in Parliament. You already have, I think, a tremendous, you know, you leave a bit of a wake because of all of the issues that you are championing, and all of them very important. And so I certainly want to express that appreciation to you as well.
Thank you so much, Kelley. All right, and I just want to give a shout out to Dale. Dale works in my office and organizes all of these things for me. So without Dale, it wouldn't happen at all. So thank you, Dale. And with that, we'll say good night, and God bless you all.
Good night.